Welcome to Strenuous Conversations. I'm Ryan, this is the man who would be knight. Kind of excited for today's episode. We're going to start on chapter 3. This is episode 4, but we took 2 episodes to go through chapter 2. So we're going to start on chapter 3, and this is where Pieper really gets into the meat and potatoes of the lecture. It's where he starts to define leisure. So actually probably my favorite chapter in the lecture. So I'm gonna go through the workout. It's posted below as usual. Folks, so the workout is completed. Made it all the way through with the 44 kilo kettlebell. Was not pleasant, but did not throw my back out, so that's good. All right, on to our discussion. Talking about chapter 3 of this book, Leisure, the Basis of Culture by Josef Pieper. By now, if you've been following along, you should be aware it was originally delivered as a lecture at the University of Bonn, summer of 1947. Bonn is in Germany, on the western side of Germany, actually. So, let's recap chapter 1. The answer is the objection, why are we talking about leisure? 1947, we're trying to rebuild the economy after a war that absolutely devastated it. shouldn't we be working instead of talking about our spare time? His answer is, we're not just rebuilding an economy, we're rebuilding a culture. And if this culture is to be a Western culture, specifically after the Western model, then we need to reckon with the fact that leisure is one of the foundations of that culture. Then he moves into chapter 2 and discusses the origin of the intellectual worker, which he regards as the pinnacle of achievement of the culture of total work. Because previous generations, the philosopher, the artist, the poet, the intellectual worker per se, was considered the opposite of a worker. He was the privileged class who didn't have to work, and therefore he had time for leisure activities, which is what philosophy is. The planned culture of total work has managed to hijack this notion and draw this intellectual into the realms of workers. He's now an intellectual worker. It's characterized by 3 traits. 1, hard work is now the only path to truth or to artistic accomplishment or to scientific endeavor. There's no room for intuition or stroke of genius. 2, the hardness of the work is the measure of the reliability of the conclusion. So activity is number 1. Toil, the willingness to suffer for its own sake, is number 2. And number 3, he's totally at the command of the state, of the social system. So chapter 3, we're going to talk about what leisure is. So we first talk about what the worker is, and the worker, not the intellectual worker, like the regular worker, factory worker, ditch digger, the functionary, is characterized by these 3 same traits. First, activity. Everything is all about activity. In fact, we'll read the full quote to you here. The worker, it has been seen in our brief analysis of that significant figure, is characterized by 3 principal traits: extreme tension of the powers of action, a readiness to suffer in vacuo, unrelated to anything, and complete absorption in the social organism. So against this backdrop, leisure appears foreign, something strange, suspect even, like, what are you doing that you have time for leisure? And at the very least, unseemly. So it's not that we don't all want to be leisured, but we just don't talk about it. Good workers don't talk about what they want to do in their spare time. They're just working. However, we may think of this as a term for idleness, but classically in the Middle Ages, sloth, or sloth, depending on how you pronounce it, one of the 7 deadly sins, or capital sins, meaning sins from which all the other sins flow. Sloth is one of those. We translate it nowadays a lot as leisure, or as laziness or idleness. In the Middle Ages, this is classically associated with acedia. Sloth is the laziness, the inability to rest. It may seem strange to us that the inability to rest is a form of laziness. So, but in the Middle Ages, acedia is not the same thing as idleness, as simply not being at work. It is defined variously. I think the best one, the best definition he has in here, it is the sadness that overwhelms man when confronted with the divine goodness immanent in himself. Man looks at God and sees that God is great and beautiful and all good and holy. And man despairs of ever being like that, says, I'm nothing compared to God. And so there's essentially a lack of trust there. We don't trust that God loves us enough and is powerful enough to fix us, to render us more than nothing. Kierkegaard has an interesting one-liner, which is odd for Kierkegaard. He never said in one line what could be said in 100. The despairing refusal to be oneself. So each man, each woman, each child was created with a destiny. We look at God not as somebody outside us, but we specifically confront God in this call to greatness that is in our souls. And we see that call to greatness and we despair. Like, I could never be what I aspire to be. That's acedia. Another definition is the tristizia seculi, the sadness of the world. So the world, we look around us, is busy, 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 busy. It's this almost suicidal rush of frenetic activity. So I see it in the clinic all the time. I see it in my clinical practice. Guys will come in, hey, I've got low testosterone. Hey, I can't sleep. Hey, I'm depressed. I'm thinking of killing myself. Hey, my marriage is destroyed. Hey, I'm anxious all the time, always afraid. I'll usually start with, how are you sleeping? And the second thing I'll start is how are you working? Are you working too much? Are you working 60 hours a week? Do you have any hobbies that you do in your spare time? Do you have something that you live for that is meaningful to you outside of work? And it takes a little bit longer to get there because you don't be like, oh, you're depressed? What do you have to live for? That's not a good clinical segue there. I'll almost always find, one, they're not sleeping, or they're sleeping very poorly, or two, they're sleeping too much. They're sleeping from 4 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon every day. Two, I'll find that either they're working constantly, 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week, 80 hours a week. They don't have time for anything else, or contrary to that, they're not working at all. They're living in their mom's basement playing video games. Now, this notion of sloth, laziness, idleness, inability to be leisurely, in a word, acedia, terribly misunderstood by later commentators who say that the opposite of acedia is industry, working hard, putting your best foot forward, putting all this effort into it. You wouldn't know this unless somebody had told you, as in my case. I didn't know this until I read it here. Thomas Aquinas considered acedia to be one of the sins against the third commandment, which in the Catholic canon is keep holy the Sabbath. It is not a sin against work. It's a sin against the command to rest. What is this leisure that we are avoiding so strenuously that is destroying our mental, physical, and emotional health? Leisure is not the same as spare time. It's not an automatic byproduct of a weekend, of a golf tournament, of time to play video games, even time to take a hike. Just because you have this time doesn't make you leisurely. It's fundamentally an attitude of the mind, a spiritual attitude that is utterly at odds with the ideal of the worker. So remember our 3 aspects of the worker: activity, suffering for its own sake or toil, and completely at the service of a social system. Let's look at each one of these. Compared with work as activity, leisure is specifically an attitude of inward calm. It's apprehension, appreciation. So instead of reaching out and grasping things and going for this and going for that, leisure is the attitude that allows us to simply accept things as they are, to see things as they are. Give it time. Let everything kind of just take its course. See how it's going to play out. It kind of leads to patience, to a restful attitude towards work. This is difficult for men of action. I've lived most of my adult life, one way or another, in the role of a warrior, professional warrior. And in that role, there is a bias toward action, rightly so. But if we live entirely in that bias toward action, the warrior aspect of the warrior poet, we end up being unbalanced individuals. If we also exercise this ability to rest, to take a step back, or as we would say, a tactical pause, and watch the situation, let it unfold. My experience has been that we make better decisions. So leisure is kind of the opposite of this need for activity, the bias toward action. But it doesn't deny activity, but the activity is coming from a place of essentially trust. So compared with work as toil, leisure is an attitude of celebration. We're not just giving time to watch the situation unfold, not just sitting back and observing the universe as it is. We are actively embracing the universe and rejoicing that it is the way it is, that there is good, that there is truth, that there is beauty. Pieper describes it as the tranquil silence of lovers, which is drawn from the strength of concord. So if you've ever been really, really good friends with somebody to the point where you could be silent with them, you don't have to continually fill the air with chatter. You can be silent with this person. The agreement is so strong that it does not need to be stated. The highest form of this affirmation, Pieper says, is festival. So if we go back to Genesis, right? God creates the universe and the world in these 6 mysterious days that everybody loves to argue about. And at the end of each day, he looks at what he's made and he says it is good. And on the 7th day, he rests from all the labor that he has done. Now this is leisure. This is what Pieper is getting at, is that we look at the universe, that's leisure as receptive gaze at what is. We say it is good and we rest. That is leisure as festival. If you remember in chapter 1, we talked about servile work versus the liberal arts, and we defined servile work as, at one point, that which is not appropriate to the Sabbath or a holy day. And I love that definition because it's not just that it's a bummer that we have to work on Sunday, it's downright inappropriate. The real business of life is to rest, to see the world, to say it is good, and to celebrate that goodness in a festival. And this is an antidote to despair. So despair drives us to separate from the universe, to look at the universe and say, it's hopeless, this is terrible. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty in this universe that is terrible. I don't think anybody with eyes in their head can deny that. But despair makes that the whole picture, whereas rest, leisure, gives us the opportunity to see that that is not the whole story, that there is truth, goodness, beauty, that there's something worth celebrating. And to be able to celebrate that even with a broken heart, there's something very powerful about that. So moving on, I'm kind of blathering here for a second. So compared with work as a social function, leisure is not for work, work is for leisure. So in a world of total work, every break from the work, whether it's a coffee break or a vacation, has the same end goal as the work itself. That is productivity. This is true in 1947 in the Soviet system. This is true in 2020 in the capitalist system, is that when you go to work and your boss insists you must take your break on schedule, and if you don't, you have to justify why you didn't take that break. They're not doing it for your mental and emotional well-being. They're doing it for production. They want you to be fresh and at it when you come back to work. Opposite of leisure. Leisure exists on a different plane. It's a higher order. It is essentially the source and end of life is this loving contemplation of the real, which is God. I emphasize that. The end and purpose of our life, the whole reason we're on this earth, is for loving contemplation of the real, which is God. So the reason I go to work is not productivity. The reason I go to work is so that I can then have the time and the space to come home and take my kids out into the woods and go on a bear hunt, as my youngest daughter likes to call it. Look at leaves, find salamanders, contemplate the world as it really is, the realness of nature, the realness of our physicality, and the physicality of the dirt and the moss and the cool air. That is the true purpose of life. And through these physical realities, to transcend them and to approach the creator of them. Work exists, in the view of the man of leisure, work exists to enable those. Now, I'm fortunate working in medicine, and before that, fortunate working as a warrior, that the goal of my work was specifically to provide the space for somebody else to do this. So whether it was cleaning up IEDs off the road in Afghanistan, so that people could drive safely to and from, so that they could be home with their families. Now, I go to clinic, I treat people, blood pressure or the flu or pneumonia. I try to relieve suffering and to create a space where they can more easily have time with their family, time in this world, time to gaze at the real. The biggest distinguishing factor, the easiest way to look at yourself and say, am I a man of work or am I a man of leisure, is to look at your Sundays and your Mondays. The man of work allows his Monday into his Sunday. In fact, he may insist on dragging his Monday into his Sunday. So on his day off, he is not resting. He is working in his heart, in his head, maybe on his computer, maybe he's waiting for that call on the phone. He's working on his day of rest. So he drags the toil of Monday into the rest of Sunday. Whereas the man of leisure takes the rest of Sunday and draws that into the toil of Monday. So on Monday, he's toiling from a place of rest that he reinforced on Sunday. And he maintains that rest, that Shabbat, that Sabbath. He maintains an aspect of that throughout the entire day. This is why I'm up at insanely early in the morning, is specifically so that I have time to rest every morning before I start my day. You may ask, well, aren't you resting when you're sleeping? No, not in this sense. Sleep is good for you. I have a love-hate relationship with sleep, but as I get older, I come to the grudging acknowledgement that it is in fact good and necessary for me, and that God created me that way for a reason, and His will be done, mysterious as it is. I am resting in the sense that I'm taking this loving look at the real. And it's easy to allow the worries of the day and the cares of what's to come to infect this time of peace, this time of rest. Very important not to let it do that. To place myself in rest at the beginning of the day and to carry that rest as best as I can. I don't do it perfectly, but to carry that rest to the end of the day when I can then say our good night prayers together as a family, put the kids in bed, talk with my wife, go to sleep myself. Leisure is part of what makes human beings truly human. An ant in an ant colony is the consummate worker, and that's what the communist system strove to bring about. The total work does have one thing right. We do have to return to the work world. Nobody can live 100% in this total absorption and contemplation. That's a superhuman trait. Leisure exists in this creative tension between work and contemplation, between the average, the everyday, the mundane, and the exceptional, the Sabbath, the holy day, the otherworldly, the spiritual. And it is precisely this tension that is creative, that is the whole human condition. We're creatures of spirit who can apprehend these spiritual realities, but we're also creatures of body who have to, continually stuff our faces with food that also happens to taste good. And we have to answer the call of nature. We have to sleep. We stub our toes. This is not a contradiction, but it is kind of a paradox. And it is in this paradox that all truly human activity exists, whether it's philosophy. One of the things that we're philosophizing about is the physical world. Art. Art is a physical medium. When we paint a picture, we're painting a picture of a thing. Poetry, music, storytelling. This tension already exists in a proper understanding of leisure, is that we step back from the work, we have a festival, we celebrate everything that is given us, and then we go back to work bringing that celebration with us. So much has been given us, we now put more of ourselves into it and create even more. Not because we have to do that or we don't eat, but because essentially we love what has been given us. I'm going to leave this chapter with one final thought that I thought was very telling, and something that I need to think about, is that we spend more time in the work world than in the world of leisure. And Pieper points out it is easier to be at tension than it is to be at rest, even though being at rest is effortless. It's easier to be at tension than it is to be at rest, even though being at rest is effortless. That's something that I need to think about a lot, because that didn't jump out at me the first time I read the book, but it jumped out at me when I was taking notes last night. All right, so I rambled a little bit. I'll edit that in post. Yeah, that was chapter 3. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, like, share, comment, tell me what you thought. Subscribe to the channel. I think once we finish this, there should be two more chapters. Once we finish this, I'll probably be looking around for another book to start, because this was kind of fun. Y'all have a great day.